Hey, can you hear me okay? Is my audio sound all right?
Yeah, it sounds good to me.
Okay, cool. I am using a different microphone this time.
Yet again?
Yeah, well, so here's the thing. I've got my recording set up at my co-working space, which is 15 now with road construction, 20 plus minutes from my house.
All right, yeah.
And occasionally it's like I need to record something and it's not worth the hour drive there and back because I have to park in the ramp and then walk to the space and get everything set up. So I went on the interweb and I looked up Jason Snell's recommendation for an entry-level podcast mic, which is this Audio Technica 2100 USB.
All right.
So I bought this, I think it was $65 on Amazon. Dynamic. It's got an XLR, but it's also a USB microphone. I got the little shock mount and the stand for it, and tested it out today as my travel podcasting setup. I've even got somebody on Amazon makes a cheap custom case for it, so I can throw it in my bag when I travel and stuff like that.
Very nice. Very nice. I tend to cart the road podcast.
Sounds like garbage,
which is not fun.
But if it sounds like garbage, I want to do it right. So
I will find out more in the post process at that point. It sounds fine right now.
I tested it and I recorded a few samples in Logic, and it seemed to sound pretty good. Doesn't have quite the dynamic range of the Heil PR40 that I normally use, but it sounded surprisingly good for what I paid for it.
Well,
so if this turns out, stamp of approval. Those of you looking to get into podcasting, check out the Audio Technica 2100 USB.
But only if this sounds okay.
But only if this episode actually gets aired. Yeah.
Yes. So given the drastic price difference between the Heil and the AT, I would imagine it's probably a good thing that this one doesn't have the range that the other does, that the Heil does. If they worked out to be the same, I feel sorry for Heil. That's a sad day.
Yeah, I love my Heil, and I actually got it from Dan Benjamin during one of his every once in a while he just clears out all of his 5x5 gear and gets new stuff. And so it's actually Dan Benjamin's Heil PR40.
So it has been through many a podcast and top-notch podcast.
It has produced many a podcast in its day. It is an experienced podcasting microphone.
Which either
Not sure
means...
if that helps our podcast get any better.
It either means it's in really good shape or it's worn out and needs to quit.
Yep.
Let's hope for the former.
Right. Well, I've got that one actually at home with me too, but I've got a different sort of dock that I had it hooked up to, and I noticed it's a Thunderbolt 2 dock that's converted into USB-C or Thunderbolt 3 for my MacBook Pro. And I noticed the last time I recorded some random artifacts, every couple minutes, and when I'm doing a project, I can go back and I can re-record those sections. When you're recording a podcast, you either get it or you don't. So I'm nervous to use that one from home. So I was looking for an alternative.
That makes sense. Yeah, there's nothing more frustrating than having recorded a podcast and then looking at your own audio and seeing these little peaks whenever you're not talking and wondering, what is that? And then it's some weird pop or boom or something, and it's purely because of a bad connection somewhere. That is frustrating.
Yeah, it's really annoying. Another thing I really like about this Audio Technica one, I like the dynamic microphones rather than the condenser microphones because you have to be in front of the microphone in order for it to pick up your audio. It's not going to pick up a whole bunch of background noise. Of course, if you can hear my dog clomping on the hardwood floor behind me, then you've proved me wrong. But this one seems to block out a lot of the extra noise. And so I warned you, via iMessage or messages before we started here that I am recording this from home. So there may be a few background noises that aren't normally there because I don't have complete control over the environment here. But we'll give it a shot. And I think that this Audio Technica does a great job of blocking out all that background stuff.
There you go. There's the podcast mic introduction, I guess, for the day, or tidbits for the day. Podcasting's it's very finicky if you want it to be. Like, you can just grab a run of the mill. Like, you could do it with your earpods that have the mic built into it. You can do it that way, and I've seen people that do that, and it can work. But if you get fussy with the audio on it, yeah, you can get really nitpicky with what chords do you use and pop filters, and yes, on and on it goes.
It is a slippery slope for sure.
And an expensive one at that.
Definitely. Podcasting can be a very expensive hobby or job, depending on your perspective.
Yes. All right. So follow up. Twitter. How you doing with Twitter?
I still really like Twitter, but I don't think I've really asked for stuff on Twitter. I asked you for something, but it wasn't on Twitter.
Yes, yeah. And whenever someone's... it's fun, because now Mike is sending me things with hashtag art of asking. I like this.
Yep.
Despite you absolutely hating the book, you're still using it.
I did. I like the message. Definitely not the messenger.
So you haven't asked for stuff on Twitter, so I need to carry this one over to next time?
I think so.
Or are you going to drop it?
I'm not really sure what to ask for, but that doesn't mean that the action item isn't valid. So I guess I need to think about this a little bit more. I try to be very, I don't know. I'm the anti-Amanda, I guess, when it comes to Twitter, because I tend not to just throw everything out there. There's enough people who do that on social media, I feel. So I tend to try to think about how I can move things in a positive direction. And that, I think, kind of works against my goal of asking for stuff on Twitter. But yeah, I put it out there. So I definitely do want to do that. Just not quite sure how to do it yet.
That's fair. That's very fair. I was trying to figure out how to use Twitter more broadly. Like, I wanted to do some of the asking bits, and I understand that. I think what I landed on with some of how I've been changing it is doing just a little bit more than just posting feeds of things. My past with Twitter has been posting fun articles and posting my own stuff, and that's pretty much as far as it went. And I'm trying to be better about using it as like a community building and platform building tool as opposed to just broadcasting. And there are a lot of folks who follow me that I would like to get to know better. And I'm trying to see Twitter as a way to do that. So it changes the way I view Twitter in the broader sense. And I think if I follow that path long enough, you eventually land on the way that Amanda was using it or is using it to ask for things and share her life, which I don't think I'll go near as far as she does. Like, I don't think that's that's not me and not my personality. So I don't see it going quite that far, but I do want to use it as a tool to interact with folks for sure.
Yeah, it's definitely a good tool for that sort of thing. And I know that like there's a lot of negativity on Twitter. I guess I've been able to avoid that for the most part.
That's an understatement.
Yeah, I know, but I'm a little bit, I mean, I get it. People are jerks, but I don't know what I would have to do to get my Twitter to flip like that, I guess. Most of the people that I meet, maybe it's just the people in the productivity space, because most of the people that I meet that are kind of running the same circles as we do are pretty cool. So I guess the productivity community and the Mac community maybe are exceptions to the general Twitterverse.
Oh, Twitter. We'll keep playing with it, see where it lands. There's the Bookworm Twitter thing, but it's purely a feed of the episodes.
It's true. Yeah. I occasionally will tag the Bookworm account, and then I'm never quite sure when you'll actually see it.
Checking the notifications for it, like I see those on a daily basis, like I'm aware of those. it's just one that's, in most cases, I'm not so certain that the Bookworm account needs to respond to them. Like, I just don't see... Like, I understand how people use blanket accounts like that, but the Bookworm account, I don't think it's one that... It doesn't really have a personality, if you will. Like, it's purely a feed-driven deal. So I tag it whenever I post things, mostly so that other people can find the feed for it, and it's a fun way to talk about it, but that's about as far as it goes for me.
Yeah, that makes sense. If only we had like a bot that could handle the Twitter account. Inside Baseball, for those of you who care, Joe basically does everything for this podcast. I just show up and record.
It's a good time. I like doing stuff like this. It's fun.
So if you have any extra money or thanks you want to send it to Joe.
Click on the links to the books in the show notes. That's the best way, because those are affiliate links. So that's how the hosting gets paid, and that's about all that gets paid with those right now. So there you go. There's the plug for the day.
All right.
You have one more.
My other
here.
action item here, was to have at least one conversation where the only goal is to listen and understand what the other person is feeling. I definitely did do this one. What's kind of interesting about this one is that the other person doesn't really understand that that's the perspective, or they don't care, I guess, in my experience, because it's a much better experience for them, obviously, to have me just understand like what is going on here rather than trying to fix everything. So I've actually been able to apply this to a lot of different conversations that I've had. I think you mentioned the last time that like with a spouse and with kids, you've got opportunities for daily practice with this. So I'm not including those in this acceptance criteria or definition of done. If you
all right,
if you want to go all Scrum on our action item,
fine, finished.
But I did actually have a conversation with somebody. I met them for coffee, and definitely this was at the front of my mind and was my only goal in meeting them, was to really just understand and hear what they were going through or what was happening in their life. And it's interesting because I guess to get a little bit religious for a moment, I do a lot of discipling, and I've actually got a discipleship group of guys that I called the Rhino Squad at our church. I've mentioned it on the podcast before. I've noticed that with men in particular, like that's always been one of my how do you describe it? Like one of the things that's really important to me is I want to raise up men, because I think that a lot of the issues that we suffer from in a society comes from a lack of people accepting responsibility, and a lot of them happen to be men. I mean, if you have a single parent family, oftentimes it's the mother who's there. It's the father who has just doesn't want to deal with it and takes off. And I think that that's wrong. And so I've tried very hard to sow into men and help men become better husbands, better fathers, better employees, better leaders, better business owners, like whatever it is. I believe that there's a lot of things that you can develop that will have generalizable results, like the cross-categorical improvement across your entire life if you implement some spiritual principles. So what I'm noticing, and this is not necessarily me, is when I sit down and I have this perspective of just listen, just understand, there will usually be at some point in the conversation like an aha moment where it's like, okay, now say this. And because I have made, going back to the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, I have made the deposits of paying attention, like really paying attention and really listening. When I get inspired to say, one specific thing, that is usually very well received. And it's really cool to see how that works. It's like you listen okay, now talk. And then when you talk, it's like what you say is hitting the mark, and you can tell like the lights are going on. And it could be, I think that a lot of times it could be like the exact same thing I could be saying, but if I haven't prepared the ground, if I have not made enough deposits, if I have not listened enough, then it's just going in one ear and out the other. So a lot of it is not even like knowing what to say, it's knowing when to say it. And I think that the listening part here is a very, very important piece to making the kind of change that I want to in people's lives.
I think it's hard to counsel people like what you're saying whenever they have some glaring issue or something that they're working through. They're not going to receive that until you've, like you're saying, until you've listened or you've paid attention or actively questioned, confirmed that you understand what they're saying. Like, until you have done a fair amount of that, they're typically not going to listen to you at the level that you would like. And it's only at that point that you can really start to share what you see as the next step. But at the same time, like what you're saying, you don't always know what the thing is that you need to share until you've paid attention long enough. And it's not easy to wait, Mike. Like, it's sometimes I just want to, like, this is the thing you need to know. I need to tell you right now. Why can't you just let me go now? Like, that's what I tend to want to do. It's like, okay, this is not the right thing to do, and yet it's the thing I want to do.
Yeah, and High Fact Finder and me, typically it's like, okay, we're going to set up this meeting and I'm going to help you solve your problem. Like, that's the old approach, I guess, or at least that would have been the tendency for the old to be the old approach. the old Mike, pre Art of Asking Mike. No, I don't know.
So what you're saying is a 2-star rated book made a big impact on you.
Well, I'm not going to give the book all that credit. But I guess what I'm going to say is that because I am a high fact finder, that's typically how I will naturally approach conversations. And I've known for a long time that that's not necessarily the right approach. I mean, if you've been married for any length of time, you know your wife either responds to that or she doesn't. Most likely she does not, like mine does. So like I've learned that in the past, but this is kind of like reinforcing it. And what I've noticed this time around is that as a high fact finder, you want to always have. I'll speak for myself. I always want to have like an agenda. Like, what are we trying to do here? What are we trying to fix? What's the problem that needs to be fixed? What's the thing that needs to be done? What's the decision that needs to be made? When you go into a conversation with the only goal being to listen or understand, it's very freeing for a high fact finder because you don't have to know all that stuff, and it's okay. I would be very nervous walking into a meeting. If somebody were to say, for example, hey, we want you to come in, we want to have a meeting. My first question is going to be, okay, what about? I'm not going to just walk into that meeting unprepared. But I guess this attitude of having of applying it to the conversation of the only goal being to listen or to understand means that I don't have to know all that stuff, and my little monkey brain inside of me is not pushing all the buttons like, hey, you don't know this, you don't know that. Does that make any sense? It's like something inside of me is suppressing the high fact finder long enough for some actual good to happen in these conversations.
Get myself out of the way. That way the positive can happen.
Exactly. But for whatever reason, just saying like, okay, all you have to do is listen and understand what's really going on here. Like, that is enough for the high fact finder nerd inside of me to be like, oh, okay.
At the same time, it's uncanny the number of times that if you're just listening to what someone else is saying, they come up with the answers themselves.
Exactly.
Or if you're doing the whole active listening thing where you want to ask questions and try to genuinely understand what the other person is thinking and feeling around a difficult topic, it's just weird how often they drive to their own conclusions. Like, what's the phrase? Like, thoughts disentangle themselves across lips and pencil tips. So
I like that.
It's not mine. I stole it from somebody. But the concept of that is that you don't fully understand how you yourself think about something until you've had a chance to verbalize it either with your mouth, by saying it out loud, or by writing it down. This is why people talk about journaling and having that be a big deal, or writing a book, or things like what we do here with Bookworm. Like, I don't fully synthesize everything about a book until we've had a chance to sit down and talk it through. So that's the concept there is, thoughts disentangle themselves across lips and pencil tips. Like, you have to get it out of your brain before you fully think it. And whenever you're having a conversation with somebody, that's what you're doing. If you're asking questions, they're disentangling what they think about it, which means they end up coming up with their own solutions sometimes.
Yeah, and that's honestly a great segue into today's book, because I think that this tome of of knowledge, the 600 pages that is Paid to Think
monster.
Yeah, a lot of this is just the right questions to ask yourself, and it's almost like having that conversation with somebody, but it's an inner dialogue where you've got the prompts, and then just by answering the questions that are outlined there, you arrive at those right answers.
So you ready to jump into this thing?
Let's do it. This might be a 10-hour episode, but
you get to introduce this thing. This is your pick.
Well, first of all, this was not actually my pick. This was
listener's Don't pick. Pass that on. You chose this.
This was a recommendation, which I picked prior to looking at the page count. This is bigger than any college textbook I ever had, and I took. I was a biology major at the beginning, so this is a very dense, very heavy book, and I think that it's a great reference book. I think that there's a lot of stuff here that I will go back to. We'll try to unpack this in an hour or two in a podcast, but it's really not doing it. Yeah, it's really not doing it justice, because all of these individual chapters, if it's the right thing for you at the right time, this could completely change your life. But I think kind of the way we approached it for Bookworm is definitely not the way that it was intended to be consumed. It's kind of like you're going to go through these exercises with your team. You're going to answer these questions during your thinking time, and you're going to establish this habit, and then you're going to move on to the next thing. And I obviously did not take that approach to this book, but there's a ton of stuff in here. And I will say that comparing it to a college textbook probably isn't fair, because I thought it was a much more entertaining and engaging read than all of my college textbooks put together.
Well, that's good.
Maybe that's just because I like the idea of this thinking time. We've actually got a dojo module that's coming out on this exact topic, which is why I picked it, not realizing how big it was. But the whole idea here is that you need to have the time to think about your problems, because a lot of the problems that we face, they're not really the problems, they're the symptoms. And you have to embrace the right mindset once you have that time in order to really uncover the real problems. And so Paid to Think kind of outlines some different processes that you can use to identify the real problems that you're facing and then figure out the solutions to those.
So my first impression of this book was, holy cow, how am I going to get through this in 2 weeks? And the nice thing was that it was interesting enough that I did end up finishing it in about 9 days, which I felt was very impressive, even for myself. And part of that was that I was going through a lot of it, and it felt like there were areas that I wanted to skim just to get past so much of it, because there is a little bit of repetitiveness with it, because you're always asking questions, and it was getting long. It's like, okay, I could just skim these 4 chapters and be okay. Like, that was my thought. I didn't. Mm-hmm. So I actually did go through and read the vast majority of it. There was a couple small sections I skimmed, but I think you're right that this is primarily about taking time to think through and ask yourself questions about the business and the life that you're leading. And it's very well laid out. I mean, it's basically a way to live. Whenever you stop and look at it, it's a way to live out life in such a way that's very intentional, which can be very overwhelming. I mean, it's talking about changing a lot in order to go in the right direction, which is intense for sure. Yeah,
definitely. And really the very beginning of this book this stuff is maybe a little bit out of order. The first thing maybe worth defining here is this Goldsmith productivity principle, the GPP, which I think starts on page 37. He mentions it a lot. Basically what this is the belief that 80% of an organization's success is determined by its systems, not its people. Most people or most organizations, you think you've got like a superstar employee, can't lose this person. What he's basically saying is that, yeah, you can, as long as you have the systems in place to do what you need to do. And that's where a lot of this paid to think methodology comes from, is how do you actually develop those systems so that you're not consistently relying on like a single person to do a job. And that can sound a little bit cold and inhuman if you look at it through the wrong lens, but it's not basically, it's not saying like this is how you get rid of all your people. This is how you make your people more effective.
This is very almost disheartening when you stop and think about it. It's like, no, I'm invaluable to the people I'm working for.
Yeah, you're not as great as you think you are.
Like, no, don't tell me this. I don't want to know this. Stop. I'm worth at least 90%, not 20%. Like that was my first thought. It's like, I don't want to know this.
I'm kind of going through this on a micro level right now because, as you mentioned, we just had a baby last week, and so I've taken 2 weeks off of work, and the podcast is still being released. Stuff is still happening at Asian Efficiency without me. So it's kind of like, they can do this without me. They did it without me at the beginning. They can do it without me again. And really, like, as I'm reading this book, it's really interesting because I'm thinking about like, okay, so I normally do this before a podcast comes out. I wonder if Marmel is going to do that the same way. And I'm recognizing all of these places that there are systems in place that need to be updated. One of the things that they talk about was like this whole maps versus words thing. And, I might have a standard operating procedure on how to release a podcast episode, but if it's written in a way that I understand it, but everybody else on the team doesn't understand it, then it probably needs to be rewritten. I can think of a couple instances of those things that I probably need to update once I get back to work.
That's the beauty of taking time off. It's like you get the perspective on these sorts of things. There you go.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the whole idea of the book, is that you need to have this time, quote unquote, off so that you can think about the problems that are in your business rather than just trying to execute and doing all the day-to-day stuff, which is where a lot of people get stuck. And he actually says, I've got so many notes in here that it's going to be really hard for me to find this stuff. But he's got a chart on one of these pages of the percentage of time that you should actually spend thinking rather than executing in your job. And he's got it for the different levels. And for the CEO level, which I wouldn't define myself as a CEO. You're definitely a CEO, Joe. So I was curious to get your feedback on this. He says that you should spend 90% of your time thinking.
I would go out of business. I'm just going to say that. The trick here is that I am on both ends of that spectrum. So I am CEO, I am middle manager, I am the grunt worker all in one. So the top may be 90-10, but the bottom 10-90, I need to be somewhere in the middle, but I don't know which route it should go. But that's an important point, because he does talk about how sometimes you do have the different roles. So that is a very important distinction that you just made, that you're not wearing the CEO hat all of the time. And I feel like a lot of this stuff that he's describing here, these are really big companies where you are only going to have one role. Yes, and if you only have the one role of a CEO, which I think would be really cool, but at the same time, that's a lot of, you need to stop and think through every little move that the entire company is making, because you're the one who is deciding the next move that all the grunt workers need to be putting in place. And, some people may not like being called a grunt worker, but, you're only worth 20% of what the company needs. So, call it what it is.
So, question for you.
Hit me.
Because you have complete control over Joe Bulig Enterprises. Okay. So what would it look like for you? Because you mentioned you can't just think about your business 90% of the time. You go out of business. But I know you've also mentioned you've probably on one of your other podcasts, that you've been looking for other people to delegate work to and stuff like that. So what would it look like, or what would it take for you to get to the point where you were wearing that CEO hat most of the time? Have you kind of thought through that? Because I think that's probably the goal for most people in a situation like yours, is how do I grow this thing?
Yes, and the trick that I have, so for those who don't know, because I talk about this stuff a lot, and I don't always spell out what exactly it is that I'm talking about with this, but my primary is web development, and specifically in the world of discourse, because, discourse expert here. And I am aware that holding on to that hat, if I'm going to grow that, the only way to really grow it is one of two ways. You can either stop doing smaller clients and only stick with large corporations and use them as your main clients. You can do that, or you can go down the path of finding other developers, managing the client relationships, and then doing the whole management process of these other developers. And the former is easier for me. The latter is a lot more complicated, especially when you're first trying to get into it, because you're trying to coerce people to work for you, and you're trying to pass projects to them, and essentially taking finder's fees, if you will, and doing the management side of it and letting them do the hard work, quote unquote hard work. And that's not a simple transition. And that's probably the only way that I could grow that side of my business. Now, the alternative here is that there are a couple other areas that I maintain and try to drive an income from. I've talked about the Productivity Guild before. That's an area that I'm working to build out. I've got the Discourse League plugins that I build and maintain, and those two I can grow, and I need to spend some time thinking through. So when I was going through this book, Mike, those two areas were the ones that I spent a lot of time focusing on, because the client side's a lot more difficult and a lot more challenging to grow in the long run, because there's a lot of development shops out there. And one of my sales deals is that this is not a company that you're hiring. This is me personally. So I'm going to manage the entire project start to finish. That's a very big selling point, and people love that. So to consider moving away from that towards being a development shop that I'm selling against and using as a sales tactic is very odd. Like, that would be a decent shift for me from a sales standpoint. But I know that I just know that with the things like the Guild or with the Discourse League plugins, those have a lot higher potential with what I'm doing. Specifically the League plugins, because it's selling code, and you have a chance of building a technology that could become a bigger business. So that's probably where the primary should be for me in the long run. So that's where I need to spend some time with the CEO hat on.
Yeah, and the reason I asked that is because I know that you do a lot of that development stuff, and no secret, I don't like client work, and I think that
what?
I think that a big reason why I don't like the client work is exactly as you described. It is easier for me to sit down and code the website than it is to find somebody that I trust and develop all the systems to have them do it for me. And I think that what that really shows is not that client work is bad. It shows that there's some thinking time that needs to be applied to this, because the long-term solution is not, I don't think, and if it is, that's fine. I think it's going to be different for different people, but I know you fairly well, so I think that the long-term solution is not Joe has a bunch of development jobs. That's something that you do because maybe you like writing the code every once in a while. Maybe it pays well. You could have a lot of different reasons for that particular hat that you wear. But I think that you're like me in that if you were to actually take the big picture approach and think about where does this fit, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, there probably isn't a whole lot of room for Development Joe. Am I correct?
Yes, because in most cases,
Client work, Joe, I should say.
Yeah, I mean, in most cases, what you find is developers who do the client work side of things, it's simply a way to pay the bills on their way towards building something that takes off. It's really hard to find someone who does what I do, who doesn't have 3, 4, 5 side things that they're building for themselves, hoping that one of those takes off. And when one takes off, they tend to drop the client work very quickly and then go build on that. Like, that's the typical trajectory there, and it's for a good reason.
Yeah, I think that a big reason here, like you just mentioned, that when people hire you, they are hiring you. They're not hiring the fact that this code is going to get written. I think that doesn't necessarily scale, and if it were to scale, you've got to redefine what your order qualifiers versus order winners are. This is one of the things I really liked about this book. He defines these different characteristics of why you might get a job or get a contract, whatever, into one of these two categories. And the order qualifiers are the things that just get you into the conversation. So if somebody is developing a Ruby project, the fact that you know Ruby is an order qualifier. It's not going to be the thing that gets you the job versus all the other people who actually know how to code Ruby. And I've seen this in my own experience where I think there's a lot of things that if you're looking at your business through the wrong lens, you don't have the right perspective, you can say, oh, this is an order winner, when really it's just an order qualifier. If you look at a lot of the other people that are out there, this thing that you think differentiates you maybe doesn't differentiate you as much as you think it does. And so you have to kind of go back to the drawing board then, and you have to figure out what are the things that qualify as order winners for our organization or for our business. And if you don't have those, how do you develop the things that will become the order winners?
Yes, and if you want to continue the example of mine, for me, the order qualifiers are Ruby on Rails, Ember, front-end development stuff, the whole styling side of things. Those qualify me to do the thing. But what I found is with the size of clients that I work with and the volume that I work with, the winners are speed. I can build something very quickly and get it out the door. And 2, you don't have a whole lot of people to work with. If you want to know something about it, you go to me. If you want to change something on the code, you go to me. If you want to add to it, you go to me. It's just a continual, this is very easy. They have a single point of contact, and that person handles everything, which is sometimes stressful for me. That's not always simple, but at the same time, it simplifies the process to the point where they don't have to deal with it, which means that their life gets easier and they see a lot of value in that, and it becomes a very big winner in most cases. It's kind of rare that I start a conversation with a client, make sure that I bring this up, and lose a contract because of it. It's kind of rare that I do that.
I think that's great. And the stuff that you just identified, those are things that don't just apply to Joe Bulig. So I think what was illuminated to me was thinking back on my experience with client work. I typically would just say, like you said, that the benefit of working with me is you get to work with me, and I'm going to make sure that your stuff gets done on time. I'm going to make sure that the code is clean. But if you actually take the time to identify what are the benefits of working with you, that is something then that you could scale. You could go out and hire somebody, and you could, in the interview process of finding the right person, you could say, okay, you got to be able to manage the project, because when someone hires Joe Bulig Enterprises, they're going to get one person who's going to handle their project, and they're going to make sure that it's done quickly, and they're going to make sure that it's done well. But I guess when I was going through this, I was thinking back to my experience and how I never actually did that. And maybe my client work experience is a little bit different if I actually do take that approach. I think that regardless of whether you're in client work or not, that this whole idea of working from the desired outcome is really important. And this gets into what he calls a cyclonic strategic thinking model, or CST. And really it's just thinking backwards, but there's 5 different steps here. And he has a lot of these types of lists, which I think kind of help cement this stuff. They give you a framework that you can actually wrap your head around rather than just, oh yeah, begin with the end in mind. So real quickly, the 5 steps here: the desired outcome, so where you want to be at the end, and then the strategy that you're going to use to get there. From there, you're going to think about the macro tactics, so big picture tactics, and then you've got the individual tactics, the little things that you're going to do every day, and then there's the execution of it. And this whole idea of executive thinking, or ET as he calls it throughout the rest of the book, is the first 4 of these. So the desired outcome, the strategy, the macro tactics, and the tactics. And that's what he's saying, that as a CEO, you should be spending 90% of your time doing and only 10% of your time actually executing the strategy and the tactics that you've identified that are going to get you where you want to go.
One of the things I struggled with on this book was the number of lists. I know you like these things, but I'm not going to remember them all. Like, I'm just going to drop a lot of them.
Me either.
I don't know that I'm going to actually end up remembering any of them time it's said and done. I was trying to, this is something I try to do in books quite a bit, is generalize it to the point that I can remember it. And this one's hard to do that with because it's so granular that it gets very difficult to say, here's what I'm going to take away from this and here's how I'm going to apply that. This is why I only have one action item that we'll get to later, but I struggled with that. And it's fun to go through it. It makes it easier to synthesize it in that moment, but I had a hard time nailing it down later on.
Yeah, that's totally fair. And that's honestly why I said at the beginning that this is a great reference, because I think at any given point in your business ownership journey, there's going to be something in here that is exactly what you need, but you don't have to necessarily memorize or remember all of this stuff. Just knowing that it's there and being able to reference it is something that I think is very valuable.
Yes, and that's something I love about having these physical books, because I will often remember, here's a thing that I picked up whenever I was reading Innovator's Dilemma. As much as that book was painful to read, this is a thing that I remember I picked up from that. But what was the exact, like that? And then I can go grab it off the shelf and flip to my notes and be done. Like, that's something I love having about that. This book is very much like that. I have a number of things outlined. I have a number of notes indexed in the back. This is something that I think will definitely, we keep talking about it as a textbook. It definitely is. Like, it's something I'm going to refer to over time. But it's not something that I think I'm going to have some big revelation as I'm going through it. It's going to help. It's supplementing a lot of what I already do.
Yeah, and he loves the Innovator's Dilemma, by the way. He talks about Clayton Christensen. Did I get his name right?
Yes.
I think.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, he talks about him quite a bit. And actually, there's a couple examples here, including the next point on the list here that you had put on here on page 323. He talks about Kodak, and this kind of gets into disruptive technologies and things like that, but he kind of references the case studies from the Innovator's Dilemma in support of some of his ideas regarding the disruptive technologies.
Yeah, and the thing with Kodak, I think that was a very interesting story, because ultimately it's about how Kodak was trying to innovate into the digital camera space. So correct me if I'm wrong here, because I just read another story about Kodak, so I'm making sure I'm getting the right one. But Kodak was working towards innovating into the digital camera space, and long story short, didn't when they originally thought they should, and ended up falling behind as a result. Which I think is where Innovator's Dilemma plays in very nicely, because the disruptive technology piece is very important. And honestly, certain sides of my business take advantage of that and trying to help corporations introduce disruptive technology. So it's something that I'm very familiar with. But I really wish, in that story, Kodak would run with what they originally had. And it's not something a lot of companies do, is continually doing research and let them run in different ways and trying to break into new territory. That's something we just don't do, but you have to take, paid to think, you have to take the time to think through those and be willing to put them in place the right way. And a lot of companies don't. And even if they try to do it, they still fail sometimes because they don't see it through to the end, like Kodak.
Yeah, that's totally fair. And it's really getting back to the innovator's dilemma. I think this is from that book, but he talks about a little bit later the innovation S curve, where you've got basically the amount of effort that you're putting towards something, and then all of a sudden you hit a point where you get a whole bunch of gain from it, and then it kind of levels out at the end. So you can't expect those same gains to continue to be provided by that innovation. And that's where Kodak was. They were at the top of that S curve, and they weren't embracing this innovator's mindset where there's really only two options. You're either catching up to somebody, or if you're the market leader like Kodak, you're creating something new. And what they didn't realize was that with digital photography, they had the future in their hands. They kind of viewed that as not that important of an innovation. And then what happened is everybody else recognized the validity of that technology and recognized the market demand for it, and they embraced it and they took off. And then Kodak, which developed the technology in the first place, basically they went out of business. I mean, I believe that they've actually filed bankruptcy now, which is kind of sad because they had this first. But there's a lot of technologies that have been like that. I remember seeing something recently. Somebody posted on Twitter a screenshot of, I think it was like Fast Company or Inc., one of those business magazines from about 10 years ago, and it's Bill Gates holding a Nokia cell phone, and it's talking about how will anybody ever be able to catch Nokia, and obviously that was right before Apple introduced the iPhone.
Yep.
And this is one of the things. Now I know I am an Apple fanboy, unapologetically so. I really like their mindset, regardless of whether you agree with their new technologies and you think that the iPhone 10/X is like the greatest thing or the worst thing. It shows that they are consistently looking for the next new thing. I saw something from one of the analysts that said that little mechanism they have on the front where the notch is, I forget what they call it, but all those different sensors and things, that is going to give them, if that really is something that catches on, that gives them an 18 to 24 month head start on this new technology, which to me just shows their focus is on like, yeah, the iPhone is the thing that's made us the most valuable company in the world, but they're always looking for that next new thing. They've famously been working on that car project, Project Titan, which up until now there has been nothing from that, but they've sunk a whole bunch of resources into it to see if there is something there. And I think that this is really, really interesting with the whole concept of the Apple TV, because Apple already completely changed the music industry. So they have some experience in this disruptive technology category. And I think that the recording industry was kind of in the same shoes as Kodak until it was too late. And then they realized, okay, yeah, this downloadable music, this is a thing. And then they needed somebody like iTunes to help them get to that point. And I think that if you're that Apple has had the technology, and I think that Tim Cook is not completely off his rocker when he says the future of TV is apps. I mean, you buy a new TV today, you're going to get Netflix, you're going to get Amazon Prime Video, you're going to get Hulu, you're going to get all of these things built into the interface, but the interface is terrible. Apple's really good at interfaces, but I think that the cable companies are extremely hesitant to give Apple this. They're extremely hesitant to let Apple control this industry like they did the music industry. And I think it's kind of interesting to see how this is going to play out, because I think they all recognize that forcing somebody to pay $130 a month to get stuff over a cable box is not going to work long term. But they're not willing to let me subscribe to just the to just ESPN, for example. So I think that this is something that if you keep an eye on it, it's going to be really interesting to see how this plays out. And it's exactly what he's talking about in this book, and also in The Innovator's Dilemma, playing out right in front of us.
Apple's good at this stuff, and they did it in the music. And I mean, something I would love to see is, especially with the Apple TV, is seeing them bring to TV and movies what they did with music, because I think we'll eventually get there where you're paying for the specific channels that you want, or the specific networks even that you want. And I could see them eventually getting to that point. And I think whichever network or channel decides to do it first is going to be in a lot better shape than the ones who are going to sit tight and say, no, I want my money through the cable company. Like, they're going to be a lot better off if they move first, because somebody's going to bite on that. Someone's going to go first, and whoever that is in good shape. I mean, it was the same way with iTunes and music. You know, the people who went first made a lot more off of it than those who waited. So again, you know, bring this all the way around. Apple's good at this because they're willing to bet on something. You know, take the iPhone notch. People are kind of up in arms over it to a point. Like, this is ridiculous. Well, it creates an iconic symbol, and it brings them into a category that people will have a hard time catching up to. And, you know, a lot of folks, well, Android already has it. Like, he kind of, not really. Like, I've set some of those things up. Not really. It's not actually where they are. You just want it to be. And that's what I tend to see with them, is they're not scared of pushing the envelope, even if it's in a way that people think already exists. Whenever they pushed out, what was the product? They're pushing out the HomePod now, and you know, it's kind of like an Echo. It's kind of like a Google Home, and this is a category that already exists, and yet they'll push it as something that's never been done before. When you start boiling down all the pieces, they're right. Like, there are some things in there that have never been done before. There's just a lot of copycats around it trying to get ahead of it. You know, even Amazon pushed out brand new versions of their Echo, trying to beat Apple to this punch. And still, whenever you boil it down, they're still not where Apple is planning to be. So I don't know. I think it's something we could talk about for a long time, Mike. I just want to know how does that team with Apple, because you know their upper management is always thinking about the next thing, and that's the mindset I would love to have, or at least pick apart and understand in more detail. I know we've had a lot of insight into Steve Jobs and his brain and how he thought about things, which he was difficult to work for, and yet he came up with a lot of different interesting ideas. That's the mindset I think that we're going to start seeing more and more of in the future. And it was even one of the quotes, and I don't have it in front of me, that came out of this book, was that there's fewer and fewer thought leaders coming out of universities and such, and going into management and going into company leadership. There's fewer and fewer people leading who are thinking through things the right way. That's something I would like to be a part of, is pushing the envelope and being willing to go out there and do that. But I don't know what that looks like. But it's the leadership side of it that I get really interested in with Apple. There's my rant.
Yeah, leadership is the next point on the outline here. But I want to actually just add one more thing to this whole idea of innovation, because like you mentioned, the Android camp specifically will say, well, that's existed on Android for a long time. And like you said, yes and no. In the Innovating Everywhere chapter, he talks about how only 10% of new products are actually new, and that 26% are improvements to existing products, 20% are new product lines created from existing products, and 26% are new additions to existing product lines. So when you're thinking about innovation, it's not trying to catch lightning in a bottle and creating this new unrelated technology that is going to change the world. It is looking at what you already have and figuring out what is the next logical step here. And this is something that, like you said, regarding leadership, but I think it absolutely pertains to innovation as well. This is something that isn't being developed. In fact, it kind of gets trained out of us as we grow older. On page 417, he says that all people are born innovators, but as they journey through childhood and into young adulthood, they become conditioned to color inside the lines, both literally and figuratively. And this is the number one reason why my wife and I homeschool, because we do not want our kids put in a room with 30 people where the teacher's main job is to keep order. You know, we want them to develop the skills to think for themselves. And actually, my nephew, who also, I think maybe last year or maybe even this year, was homeschooled. He's 10 right now. He'll be 11. Kind of had an aha moment the other day because he has trouble getting through his work. He tends to procrastinate and just kind of dawdles, and then it's 6 p.m. and he's not done with his schoolwork yet. So I introduced him to the Pomodoro method. And my sister-in-law said that this completely changed things for him. And he's getting all of his work done in 2.5 hours. And some of the people who are in the education system 2.5 hours, well, you're not getting your work done. Yes, he is, because this is exactly the skill set that I have had to learn as I've worked from home. These are the things that are really going to help you be successful in the new economy. And these are the kinds of things that, like you said, typically do not get taught. It's not the reading, the writing, the arithmetic. Yes, those things are important, but it's these other things that are just as important. These things that you can apply to your life every single day to get gains.
There's a lot there. I don't know where to jump in off of that, but I know that the homeschooling thing is something we're planning to do. We have a lot of reasons for that, but a lot of it comes down to when you really start to consolidate it, it comes down to being able to custom tailor what our kids are learning in a way that helps them in the real world. And I hesitate to use the phrase real world just because I know that's technically the point of public school as well. I just don't feel like the little things are taught in such a way that they should. And again, that's boiling it down way too far, but that's the general thing there.
Yeah, well, I mean, kind of transitioning into the leadership section, because that's the next point on the outline, and it's something that you brought up earlier. One of my big takeaways from the leadership section was from page 345. He says that people will follow you when they believe that you will get them where they want to go. And it is impossible to ask even a staff of teachers in that environment to get every single kid where they need to go and to get them to buy in, because you have to invest in those people individually in order to get that buy-in. And I've seen teachers who absolutely they are able to do this, but it's not everybody. And what happens in that setting, my own personal opinion, my own personal experience, is that if you don't have at least the majority embracing that mindset, then the whole message gets diluted. You may think that this one teacher, yeah, they absolutely changed my life, but it's unless everybody has that mindset, then the general feeling that I have towards my education is honestly, a lot of it was a waste of time. even in college, where I have a business degree and I apply a lot of that stuff, even on a daily basis, I still look at the amount of money that I invested. And I know that part of this is I went to a private school instead of a public school, but still, the cost of tuition is so expensive. There are other ways that I could have learned those particular skills, and the things that are really going to make the difference are not those facts, those numbers, those charts. It's the relationships. It's the networking. It's the people that you meet. That's where the value lies. And it's going to be interesting to see, because I think it's kind of at a tipping point with a lot of these online educational programs where, yeah, there are some jobs where you need to get a certain degree or a certain certification, but the options that you have in order to get those types of things, in order to get the knowledge that you need, there's a lot more, and there's a lot more different delivery options that weren't available even 10, 15 years ago when I was going to school. This book, this is a really great example, because this is the kind of thing that I was reading through this. I'm like, man, I wish I would have had a class like this when I was going to college, when I was learning my business degree. This would have been great. And I was thinking about it. I'm like, this book cost me $35 on Amazon. If I would have actually taken a class, how many thousands of dollars would that have cost? And thinking back to the classes that I've taken, I've got a bunch of notes here on this, and there's a couple things here that I've action items that I'm going to apply to my life. They're I don't know that I've still got that type of stuff. Like, that stuff that I learned in college has really made that big of an impact, because the whole system is set up to pass the test. And once you pass the test, at least my own personal experience, you forget most of what you quote unquote learned.
Yeah, I'm with you there. So going to public school, I felt like I was really good at getting homework done in school. And that meant that, because primarily I was trying to get it done that way, I didn't have to do it when I got home. And doing all of my schoolwork at school ended up, in the long run, teaching me very little about self-discipline in the long run, because, let me get this thing done now, and then I don't have to do anything later. And I can do whatever I want. So then I ended up in this pretty rough place. So I felt like school didn't really prep me well for working in the real world. And I continue using that phrase. But it's something that I don't want my girls to deal with. So this is where the homeschooling thing and leading my girls to a point where they can pick up on a lot of this, and I can teach them these the little skills, like a Pomodoro. Like, I can teach them those things specifically geared towards them. So I'm with you there. I know that when it comes to the leadership side of things with this book specifically, that a lot of people would benefit from this. I know a lot of MBAs that would benefit from having read this, and it's something I wish more people would do, is read books like this, even though this one I felt like was really kind of long and there's a lot to digest here. And
Definitely,
I think if
was long.
I think if you didn't have some of the background of the other books that we've read, this would be a nightmare for most people, I think. If you don't,
this is a totally different book if it's the first one we do for Bookworm.
Yeah, this is completely different for sure. So I don't think, if you haven't been a reader of much in the past, don't pick this up. It is not for the everyday reader for sure.
That's completely fair.
But if you're one like us who has been through a lot of business books, you've been through a lot of self-help, productivity style books, you can pick a lot up out of this, because there's a lot of summary with things that you already know, and yet there's a lot of little nuggets that you can pull out of it. So I think that's where your point of, you wish you had read this instead of maybe some of the degree stuff, though the degree is still nice to have. But having gone through this and compiling that with a lot of the other information that we've consumed and discussed here on Bookworm, it's a great book to go through for sure.
Yeah, definitely. This stuff has more value in my work life than my entire statistics class. But that was required for the degree, and this wasn't, which kind of gets me thinking, like, who decides this stuff anyways? And actually, are you familiar with Omar Zenholm, the $100 MBA guy?
I know the $100 MBA, but I don't recognize that name for some reason.
He actually was on a podcast, and I forget which one it was. I listened to it probably a couple of years ago now. But the $100 MBA is literally an online class for how to run an online business, essentially. He's teaching you the things that you need to know in order to get your business off the ground. And he's an interesting guy, because if I'm remembering the story correctly, he was actually a professor at a university, and he was teaching business classes, and he was frustrated because he was having to teach them how to manage factories. And he's like, there is no way any of these people will ever need to manage a factory. Like, this is so old school. We should be teaching them this instead. So he looked at what is the process to get some of these newer things added to the curriculum. And after he would submit it, it would take at least 2 years in order for it to be approved. And at that point, he's like, well, it's all changed by then. So he quit his job as a university professor, and he developed this $100 MBA where literally you can go pay $100 and you sign up and you get this video course, and he's teaching you the things that he understands about business. He's a really smart guy. I actually signed up for it a couple of years ago, and it's really good. It's kind of like the pre-Fizzle, I guess, if you want to think of it that way, where Fizzle kind of teaches a lot of the same types of business type things, but it applies it to a specific context, like starting a blog or creating an online course or launching a podcast, things like that. And I think that just very clearly articulates the real problem here. Now, kind of getting back to leadership, and really I think that this is what Omar Zenholm did, is one of my takeaways here was effective leadership is recognizing the real situation. So he talks about effective leadership leads from both the front and behind, depending on the need and situation. And he talks about the different ways that you can look at yourself as a leader. This is one of my action items, is to look at myself from what he calls the outside in perspective to see what areas that you can improve. It's very freeing. We talk a lot, it seems, about this whole idea of like personal responsibility. But if you view the situation as what can I do to fix this, as opposed to, well, this is wrong and they should fix this for me, then you've got a lot more control over the situation, which I think like that really taps into this whole idea of leadership. But recognizing that Omar Zenholm, I'm a professor at this university. I want to prepare people to own their own businesses, and I'm not able to do that in my current situation. Like, what are the options available to me in order to remedy this? And this is something that I want to do. Like I mentioned, this is the action item for me, is to look at myself. What are the areas that I need to change, that I can alter, that I can quote unquote fix to make everything that I do a little bit easier? How do I solve the problems that exist in my life, basically, through this lens of myself as a leader and taking responsibility for the situation? Maybe I'm not the ultimate person who has the final say on the situation, but that doesn't matter. What can I do right now to make it better?
You're translating it to leading yourself, like leading your personal life. That's what it sounds like to me. Is that fair?
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
Which will play into my one and only action item, but I'm still not going to share it till later. All right, so talk to me about video games. You got it on here.
Yeah, so one of the unexpected things that I've found in this book, there's a lot of these little statistics that if you're paying attention, there's a lot of these nuggets that can provide a lot of insight, I think. But I forget what section this was, but he talked about how people who play video games, actually what it does is it improves your decision-making skills, because you have to make quick decisions. He said that people who play video games make correct decisions 25% faster, and they typically take action up to 4 times faster than the average person, which I never really thought about it that way, but that makes total sense. And this whole idea of taking action faster, there's a lot of value in that, because a lot of times we know what we're supposed to do and we just tend to overanalyze things and we don't take action. Paralysis by analysis, where if we would just take action, we would make the right decision. So this is actually a really big benefit in my opinion. And the action item for me is to play more video games. Now I've got a little bit of a head start here with the baby being born, and actually, as we record this, FIFA 18, which I used to be big into FIFA, and I haven't played it maybe for like 5 or 6 years because we haven't had an up-to-date system that could actually run it. We've got a Nintendo Switch now, so I've actually got FIFA 18 for the Switch, and I'm not saying I'm going to play video games for a half-hour day or anything like that, but this is the kind of thing where like I don't create the time to quote-unquote play, and this is something that I believe that there is some value to. Now, obviously, it kind of depends on what you're doing with the video games, and obviously you don't want to take it to the extreme. But what I'm recognizing here is that fast action response that video games give you is actually a good thing.
Well, that's fair. I'm still not going to get into video games. Sorry.
That's okay.
It's the same old, like, if I'm going to dedicate time to this, I have to take it away from something else, and I'm not going to take something away right now for video games. Just not going to happen. Sorry.
Fair enough.
I'll let you play them. You tell me how it goes.
All right. Well, FIFA is kind of the one thing that I've really gotten into over the years. It helps that Tan is really into FIFA as well. So like I was on Hip Chat the other day and I'm like, happy FIFA day. But so it's almost like not necessarily a community, but it is sort of a social thing where you can play other people online and stuff like that too. So it also kind of helps me get outside of my box a little bit. That's the big thing for people working from home. It can be both a a benefit and a detriment is the fact that like you don't have to put your suit and tie on and go to the office and interact with other people. I know a lot of people, and I try very hard not to fall into this category because I'm an introvert and I definitely could see myself doing this. In fact, my kids, they tend to do this. My 7-year-old will wear pajamas pretty much the entire day. And every once in a while I'll be like, hey, you got to get clothes on. He's like, why? Like, you just need to.
This is life. Put on your clothes.
Yep.
Oh, video games. Yeah, I have had a number of people tell me that I need to get into video games. It still doesn't happen. I barely watch TV, let alone get into games.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, I don't really watch TV either. If you're going to, I don't think they necessarily have to be classified as different things either. I think if you were to say, okay, I'm going to spend so much time watching TV, then use that quote unquote TV time playing video games instead of watching Game of Thrones or something like that. I guess that's the takeaway for me, is that if you're just going to sit there and watch something, that's really not going to add any value. I mean, obviously it depends on what you're watching too. Like I watched the film on minimalism with my wife, and that was really impactful. But most people, they're not looking for that when they go look at what's in their Netflix queue. So it's recognizing that, like, what you're doing, what is this actually doing for me? And I think that in terms of like video games, yeah, it can help you disconnect. It can help you relax, I guess. I don't want to say zone out, although that definitely is a possibility, I guess, but not for me the way that I typically do it. I mean, I'll go online, I'll play a game or two of FIFA, and then I'll turn it off, and that takes maybe a half an hour. It's not like I'm, binge watching Game of Thrones or whatever the latest TV show is, where it's just like show after show after show, just so I know what happened.
Yes, but unless it's something like the Great British Baking Show, then you can learn lots. I'm a fan.
I suppose.
Of course. Because my bread thing, yes, it translates. I like it. Go British.
I used to think that there would be some sort of knowledge transfer for watching those types of like cooking shows. Learned that typically is not the case, at least for me and my wife. Like we would watch the shows, and a lot of them now it's not so much like this is how you do it sort of thing. It's more so the drama, which, I get. People like that sort of thing. In fact, I have a friend who is one of the top camera people for the Top Chef show.
Oh yeah.
But I just can't watch it anymore. Save the drama for your mama. I don't need it.
Nice. Yeah, with shows like the Great British Baking Show, I tend to get a lot out of it because I'm translating it to how could I make a thing like that, given what I know about making, say, sourdough bread. And that process is one that I am very intrigued by, and it's inspired me to try a few things. So I've picked up a lot from it, but I think you have to be very pointed with the thing that you want to watch and know how you're going to translate it probably before you ever do that. Like, I think there's got to be something like that.
Well, it sounds like you're already applying the 5 steps to applying executive thinking to your British baking show then, because the first one is learning, the second one's applying, the third one's adopting, fourth is integrating, and fifth is becoming. So what you're saying is that you're watching the show and you're learning, and then that actually translates into you actually becoming a better breadsmith.
Breadsmith, I love that. I like that. Coin that term for sure. No, that show it's interesting. Like, we watched it last night, and I forget which episode it was. And they had for those who know, it was the Scandinavian princess cake, which is just intense on how you make it. And it inspired my wife, and she looked up the exact recipe and told me, I'm going to make this. I'm like, okay, go for it. Like, I'm all for this. Like, yes, by all means, that looks amazing. Please make me a cake to try.
Nice. That sounds pretty good.
So yes, I'm with you. There's this whole process of how you apply this executive thinking model, which the whole book is based on, and it's actually not complicated. Like, this is one where, and maybe this is the generalization that I'm pulling from the book of, here's the thing, I want to learn about it. Here are the steps I need to take to actually implement it into my life. It's something that I apply, and then I continually iterate over it to get better with it, and then I become that thing that I was working towards. If you want to take that same model, let's get off of the breadsmithing and work back towards the coding side of it. This is the exact same thing. You learn a lot about code, you learn how it works, you try to build something on it, and you iterate off of it, and eventually at some point you can say, hey, I'm a developer, woohoo! Like, you get to that point where you've done it enough and you've been at it long enough that you're good at it, and you're comfortable saying you are that thing. Don't tell Jeff Goins that, because he would say go the other way, like, I am a writer, and then you work the way through the process. But this stepped process is the other way around.
Yeah, exactly. And this whole idea behind applying the executive thinking, this is something that at the very end of the book, he has a bunch of different examples and like testimonials of people who are applying this in a lot of different arenas and a lot of different scenarios. One lady in the back of the book talks about how she applies this to every personal decision that she makes. And I think that maybe that is a little bit extreme. Yeah, but the whole idea here is that this isn't just for the CEO. This isn't just for management. This isn't just for somebody who is in business. These are skills that you have the opportunity to apply to all of your different decisions as you go about your day. No matter what situation you find yourself in, there is definitely opportunity to apply these principles in your personal and professional life.
Did you feel like this was similar to Getting Things Done? Did you get that vibe?
No, mainly because he taught different stuff after the first 10 pages.
I mean, the 5-step process, like the steps he goes through, to me, maybe I'm just thinking about it wrong, but it seemed very similar to collecting, going through the thing you've collected, building off of it to create a system out of it, and then putting it in place. Like, maybe it might just be because I like finding that correlation. Like, I like finding areas where GTD falls right in line with what something that already exists and something that people have already created. So it's interesting to me the number of times I see that correlation come out.
Well, I think that with GTD, you can take anything and put it in the top and get a very clear, this is what the next action is on the bottom. I don't think you can do that with the simple 5-step process for executive thinking, because the process isn't necessarily as important as the questions that you ask throughout the process. So if all you did was apply the desired outcome strategy, macro tactics, and execution, that's not enough to get you any sort of results. Does that make sense?
Yes, that's fair. I'm with you there.
So it's a framework that has a lot more flexibility, I guess I would say, which is one of the things that I know people have trouble with GTD. Some people really like the simple, straightforward formula. Some people don't like it and they try to modify it. In fact, I'm not sure if you caught this, but I sent over some videos for you to look at for a product that we're working on. And I basically created a new category in the GTD workflow, because there's this thing, especially when it pertains to email. It's like, is this something that I need to take action on, or is this reference material? Maybe it's just something I want to read later. It doesn't really fall into either of those categories. So what do I do with this thing? And a lot of people that I interviewed, like, that was a big pain point for them. They're familiar with GTD, but there's this thing that they're like, well, it's not really this or that, so I'm just going to leave it in my inbox and not do anything with it. That's not a good solution. That's completely anti-GTD, but that's what happens with GTD because it is so rigid. And maybe that's not even the way that David Allen intended it, but that's the way that it gets applied a lot. And I think that with the framework and the methodologies that are applied in Paid to Think, there's a lot of room for interpretation with this.
That's very fair. And I get some of the pain points with GTD, and I see where people are trying to create new categories. I always tend to see these new categories as ones that fall into existing categories. It's mostly semantics that people want to put in on it. That's what I tend to see. And it's always, I don't know, I think it's interesting. The number of ways that people try to say, I'm leaving GTD and I'm doing this now. It's like, yes, but the thing you're doing now is GTD. You're just calling it something different. Like that's, it's uncanny the number of times I've seen that, but it's a fun marketing tactic. I get that. So I have a hard time faulting them because I know what they're doing to an extent. They may not realize they're doing it themselves, but that's what I tend to see.
Yep, definitely. And with GTD, I think that there's, I don't know. I mean, I get David Allen's approach. Very first book we did for Bookworm was the new version of GTD, and I was pretty disappointed by it because I was expecting a lot more evolution in the framework. I was expecting a lot more in terms of the research supporting the framework and the reasons why the stuff was there. And it kind of felt like after reading that book, he's got something that's making money, so why change it?
Yes. Yes.
So, and that's fair. You know, I get that. It kind of gets into the last point here on selling continuously. This is a really interesting chapter to me because the big takeaway here is that everybody is selling. On page 465, he says, the success of every leader hinges on his ability to sell himself as capable and credible, to sell his ideas the way a salesperson sells products and services, and to sell others on the promise that he can take them where they want to go. So I think that, you know, transitioning away from GTD, because I don't want to just completely bash bash that book again.
That's probably good.
This whole idea of selling yourself, this is interesting, and I want to get your perspective on this because I know that this is something that we've both kind of struggled with in the past, but I work with a company that has dedicated people to sell stuff, and you're kind of the guy who does it for you. So what was your thought on this particular chapter? Was there a lot in here that you really liked and resonated with you, or was this an uncomfortable chapter for you?
It was one that I understood. I get what he's saying. In that particular realm, I tend to want to know, what does it mean? This is one of my sticking points on the book. He talks very high level in a lot of cases, and it's very philosophical, if you will. And I tend to want tactics. Like, what do you mean by build out a platform? Like, great. What do you mean by that? Because people mean different things when they say that. And I tend to want to know what you mean by that. Oddly enough, since the time that I read this and now I read another book, Ryan Holiday's Perennial Seller. And if you want to focus on that specific chapter, I highly recommend that book. So Perennial Seller is one that I picked up way more on this topic than I did from David Goldsmith here, simply because it's dedicated to that. And Holiday does a lot of selling of products for a long time, which is exactly what Goldsmith is getting at here with building a thing and then selling it over and over and over for your life, essentially. That's what I got out of that section. But to me, from this specific book, I felt like I was struggling with it and was wondering, what am I supposed to do with this? That was my question from this specific book. But thankfully, since then, I read another one that covered that topic exactly. So I don't know what else to tell you there.
Okay. Yeah, that's fair. This is an interesting chapter for me because I think that what it really showed me was that everybody is in sales, whether you are a salesperson or not, whether you have an online business or not. The example that I thought of right away, I think he touched on this in like a sentence or two, and that really got my mind going in this direction, that if you have a significant other, then you have sold yourself and your abilities to meet that person's needs to at least a certain degree. People are not just throwing themselves at you because you're you. You have done something to position yourself in the marketplace in a favorable light. And that I think is really interesting because everybody does that. And what that shows me is that everybody has the ability to sell. And especially for me personally, because I want to develop my leadership skills, selling is absolutely critical in the leadership arena. Leadership is selling because, as I mentioned when we were going through the leadership section, that people have to believe that you can get them where they want to go. Well, if you want people to follow you, then you have to sell them on the fact that you can get them where they want to go. They're not just going to come to you because you've got all of the skills and things like that. You have to be able to communicate that in an effective way. And in this chapter, there are 4 cornerstones that he has for engaging others. So I think that there's a ton of stuff here that you could unpack. You know, there's a lot of things here that you could spend a lot of time talking about, even just these 4 cornerstones for engaging others, but I'm just going to run through them real quickly. Number 1 is the behaviors, so how you act. Number 2 is oratory skills, and this is why, in my opinion, every single person should be in Toastmasters. Number 3 is writing skills, and then number 4 is interpersonal skills. And you probably heard in some way, shape, or form that one of those things is really important when it comes to leadership, building a platform, however you want to frame it. But I thought it was really interesting to see all 4 of them grouped together. And that's what David Goldsmith does a really good job of, is providing these lists. And there's too many of them, in my opinion, for them all to resonate. But this particular one did with me.
That's fair. Go for it.
Also in this chapter is the idea of guanchi, I think he calls it, which is like the circles of trust. And when it comes to leadership and selling, like that's what you want to develop, are these circles of trust. And I also thought that it was interesting on page 490, he talks about how stats and stories are persuasive. And he actually has a formula for selling with stories. He has like a diagram with the 3 different pieces to it's a very basic hero's journey in essence.
So I have a close friend and mentor who gives me a lot of advice when it comes to client work and how to sell to them. And he's very good at finding where some of my pain points are in the process and helps me see a lot of the issues that I have with it and what to do about them. And something he has told me numerous times is the acronym ABS, and it's not anything new, but always be selling. And I think it's very interesting because when you stop and think it through, even when I'm having conversations with friends, if I always have in the back of my mind of talking about the things that I'm doing, say, for work, or the ideas that I'm exploring, those are all sales tactics to an extent. And it's uncanny the number of times that those one-off conversations eventually lead to something where someone remembers that I was talking about something with OmniFocus. And I'm like, well, I've never heard of OmniFocus. Okay. And then they have another friend 3 months later who mentions OmniFocus. And like, oh, do you know Joe? Like, he's got a whole course on it. Like, it's weird how often that sort of thing happens. And I've never really forgotten this, simply because it's weird how often these things are interconnected and they continue to come back to you. So at the same time, you have to be careful with it because you don't want to ruin friendships over this, and you're pushing your ideas and pushing your stuff all the time. Like, go back to the beginning, asking questions and listening. Like, it can go both ways. But at the same time, it's interesting to me to see all the interconnectedness of this stuff whenever you start looking at selling the ideas and selling the thing that you're working on. And I don't know, Mike, how do you, because you do a lot of this stuff with Asian Efficiency, but they do a large part of the sales and marketing side. What did you get from this as far as like what you specifically can do for you?
Well, I think that one of the big takeaways for me is that there are many different paths to yes. In fact, he's got a diagram with a bunch of different ways that you can get to yes. And then that coupled with several small yeses can be just as effective as one large yes. That's actually the example I got from the book of somebody who is proposing and that they're about to be married is that you didn't just all of a sudden show up with a diamond ring and be like, hey, will you be my wife? That there were several smaller transactions that took place along the way. Applying that to online business and your example with the OmniFocus course, like this is where I think a lot of the sticking point is for people in our shoes is that you don't want to just show up and be like, hey, buy my thing. Because if you don't know the person's situation, if you haven't had those several small yeses, then that can seem like a really gigantic hurdle to say, hey, pay me money for this thing. But if you can get people to say yes to other things along the way, you can have a very clear idea of whether that course or whether that thing that you are selling is the right thing for that particular person. It makes it a lot easier to feel good about offering those solutions to people. As it pertains to agent efficiency, I mean, we have somebody on staff now who has some experience with internet marketing, and she's writing sales letters and she's writing marketing copy, and she's really, really good at it. But I used to have to do that sort of thing. All of the podcast episodes that we would do for the productivity show that have like the intro and the outro, like I would write those and I would write the headlines, and I'm not great at it, but I've had a bunch of practice, and really it comes down to being honest about what you are offering, and then being okay when people say, yeah, actually, I want to give you money for that thing because there is value there that is going to solve a problem that I have. That's the big thing for me from this chapter, is identifying what it is that you are actually offering. What are you actually selling? This is a quasi-action item, I guess, for me, is to figure out, if someone were to say, Joe Bulig, Mike Schmitz, what do you do? Have like a one sentence thing that very clearly articulates what I can offer of value that they can actually pay me money for. Because that's what makes this all work, and it's completely fine. It's completely ethical as long as it is done in the right way, and I'm not misrepresenting and saying, oh yeah, I'm going to solve all of these problems for you, and then I can't deliver on those. That's where things start to feel scammy, in my opinion.
Fair enough. You ready for action items?
Let's do it. So I got a bunch of them here.
You do.
Yeah. So number one, I mentioned, because this will be the easiest one for me, I think, is play video games.
Cheater.
So I've got some practice on that already. We'll see if that sticks once I quote unquote go back to work.
All right.
Another one for me is this outside-in analysis of my own shortcomings as a leader. I've started doing this, but I haven't formalized it, and I need to just like sit down for an hour or two and just really think about this, figure out what my weaknesses are so that I can fix them. I have a little bit of an idea of some of them. I also want to, and these other two we didn't really talk about in terms of like the actual chapters in the book, but these are just little things that stood out to me. Develop an idea bank. I tend to capture things into drafts, but I realize that I don't have a very concrete place that I store all of these ideas. And I don't know. I mean, the easy thing is just to send that to something in Evernote, but I want to develop a process for curating these things before they would even get in there. Basically, what I want to end up with is a bank of ideas that I know are really good. And then I can go in there whenever I, quote unquote, need an idea for something. And I can look through those things and just be like, yeah, this is the time for that one. In the past, I have definitely been the type of person who's like, oh, I've got this idea. I got to do something with this. But I'm recognizing that from this book, that ideas themselves aren't the thing. Like, anybody can have an idea. And if you pay attention for any length of time, you will have ideas. But the things that makes some ideas successful is the process that they go through to get refined, which is where a lot of the lists from this book come in. And once they've gone through the refining process, then maybe this idea is gold, or maybe it's garbage and it needs to be thrown away. So what I want is a bank of ideas where I can go in there at any given moment and flip through those things and then pick one if I wanted to and say, yeah, now is the time for this one. Does that make sense?
Sounds like a someday maybe list.
kind of, but not really.
Because I can't help myself.
An extra level of curation that needs to happen before the someday maybe list. And the someday maybe list is different in my opinion, because that's something like, well, someday I want to go take this trip. Someday I want to go do this thing. This is more like, what are all the things that I could do to build the business? And as I get those ideas, I'm going to put them someplace. But I don't want them to just be like random junk. Like, yeah, hey, I could hold a conference, or I could do whatever. Like, a lot of that stuff, if it's half baked, it's really not a good idea. So what I want is to develop a process before it gets to the quote unquote someday maybe list inside of Evernote or DevonThink or whatever that looks like.
Yeah, I think you and I just have different ways of thinking about someday maybes. I'm aware of that. I just maintain enough of them that I have different levels of seriousness with them, where I've got one that anything and everything that pertains to business just goes in there. And then over time, they move to other lists depending on what they are and how baked out they are, like how done they are towards being a realistic thing. And they get culled along the way if they're good or bad, depending on where they should land. So I just have a different way of running with that and have for quite some time. So I think you and I just have different semantics around it.
Yeah, and I guess my definition of this really comes from how we use Jira at Asian Efficiency, because we've got a space, we've got a space inside of Jira where we can submit ideas, and then every once in a while we'll have a meeting and we'll go through all the ideas and we'll say, hey, yeah, this is a great idea. Let's work on this one. But everything that gets submitted to the ideas space is not something that we're going to do. It's not something that is going to be done at some day. It's not even, I don't know. I mean, of all the ideas that get submitted, the percentage of them that get taken action on is fairly small. And that's my concern, I guess, with the someday maybe list is like, I don't want to have 100 things in here and then there's only one or two that are really valid. I want to just see the one or two. And if I recognize that there's only one or two things in my idea bank, then that means that I've got to set aside more time to think and develop more ideas, because the ideas are there as long as you create the time for them, if that makes sense.
It does.
Cool. And then my last one here, I was a little bit hesitant to put this one on, but I think that this is going to be fairly simple and there'll be some value in this. There's a whole section in here where it talks about alliances. And one of the things that I want to do is I want to list out my allies. And the reason that I want to do this is because I think that with a lot of organizations, with a lot of businesses, it can be, the tendency can be to look at the things that are not working, especially if they are inflicted by other people. And then you almost are viewing that person as you're working against them instead of working with them. So I want to make a list of allies just so I recognize that we are all on the same team.
Fair enough. I hope I get to be on this list. Just a little secret that I want to put out there. So I have one action item, and I have teased this a few times throughout this show. And it is primarily that I need to work through my project planning methods. And I've been calling it like my project management system, but not in your typical project management way. Like the traditional way of thinking of that is, here's a project, here are all the steps that help me get that project done, here are all the timelines, here's who it's assigned to, blah, blah, blah. That's not what I'm talking about. Ultimately, what I'm getting at is I have a lot of my client projects, a lot of my own projects, and planning out when those are going to happen and maintaining the details of those. Similar to what you would do with a task, like just moving the physical project and managing it itself, similar to what you would do with a task within that project. In trying to figure out, can I use, I can't help myself, the GTD method on the project level, which is similar to some of the higher horizons that come out with David Allen stuff. But this book really showed me that I need to be better about strategically planning when I'm going to do what. And that led me to non-digital planning tools, of course, because I do that. So I have, and I've shared this on, I think it's on behind the paywall of the Guild, so can't link to that, but I've shared some of this on the pro side of the Guild, but the project planning method I've been using currently is the whiteboard that I've got in my office. Mike, you haven't been over here. You got to come visit. I'm going to show you this whiteboard system that I use. But I have this whole process of using these larger Post-it notes to manage projects, and I'm trying to figure out how that plays into the higher level thinking that a lot of what David Goldsmith is talking about in the book, and trying to maintain how do I put what project where and when, and what is it that needs to happen on that to move it forward. That's what I'm working through. You're going to have to ping me on this one every week or so that we record, just because it's a continually evolving process, and I'm trying to take a lot of what came out of this book to apply it to that whole process of planning these projects out and moving them around from place to place. That's what I'm working on.
Nice.
Great fun. So, author style and rating, hit me.
So I really like the author's style. I really like the list. There's definitely a lot of information here, and it definitely got to be too much for this particular setting. But that's the only bad thing I think I could say about this, is that from the bookworm context, it's a lot. From the potential to change your life perspective, I think that there's tons of good stuff in here. And if you got even one of those lists that really clicked with you, it would be worth your while. But it is 600 pages, and they are big pages. So it's definitely not something that I'm going to recommend to everybody. I really enjoyed it, though, and I'm going to give it 4 stars. The only reason I'm not giving it 5 is, like I said, it really doesn't fit the bookworm format, and it's really, really long.
Yeah, you're like iterating the exact thing that I wanted to say. Is like, it's long. There's a lot here. If you haven't read a lot of the books that we've been through, this is intense, and you're likely going to hate it. That's my thinking. So I hesitate to recommend it to people. But if you followed along and you're into these business books sorts of things, like that level of book, I could see where there's a lot of really great things here. It's long, and there's a lot of lists, and it's hard for me to generalize it down the way I like to. So I'll join you on the 4 stars bit for all of those reasons, but that's where I landed on it. I think it's easy to read, and I didn't want to skim anything because there's a lot of little nuggets in it for sure. But you really need a framework and a foundation built on a lot of these principles before those little tidbits really come out, and before you can really do anything with those.
Yeah, that's completely fair. I think that your perspective really determines what you're going to get out of this particular book. Brandon Wentland wrote an article on the Asian Efficiency site a while back on picking the books that you're going to read to solve the problems that you're facing, which I think is a really brilliant idea. And if you are already bought into the idea of thinking time like me, and you're just wondering, how do I actually implement this? Then this is a great book. If you're just looking for something entertaining to read and the topic isn't necessarily something that's completely resonating with you, then you're going to quickly get burned out by this book.
Agreed, for sure. Which leads us into what's coming up next. So this one was Mike's choice. As much as he likes to pawn it off on our dear listeners, this was still your choice, Mike. You can't.
It's true. Can't
do that. So the one I have chosen for the next round is Anti-Fragile by Nassim Taleb. Taleb? Not sure how you say that. I should
another
know
short
this.
book.
He's it's another short book for sure. And I knew how long this one was when I picked it. I just wasn't planning on Mike picking a textbook prior to this, so that I would have a little more time on it. This one's, what is it, roughly 400 pages, 420-ish, somewhere in that range. So another long one. Sorry about that.
Yep.
But tagline on this: things that gain from disorder. So we talk a lot about structures and systems, hoping this one kind of breaks that mold a little bit.
Yeah, this is one that's been on my list for a while. And I think that the tagline there is very, very intriguing. So this will be fun.
Yeah, I haven't even started it, so very interested in this one.
Yeah, mine actually comes tomorrow, I believe. So I'm gonna have to crank on this one.
The one after that is Mindset by Carol Dweck, which is a book that has been on my list for quite a while and is another reader recommendation. But I know that this one is much shorter than Paid to Think, so I feel confident picking this one.
That makes me happy. I'm working through a Gap book at the moment. Should finish it up in the next day or so. Finish by John Acuff. Fun story. 2 nights ago, I actually got to go to his book signing for this book. I pre-ordered it and was in the middle of it whenever I got to go meet him and have him sign it. Great fun. So this is it's a book about not starting new projects, but how do you actually beat perfectionism, procrastination, and such, and finish those projects. And I like John Acuff, so I'm excited about.
Yeah,
that.
we're gonna have to do one of his books for Bookworm, because I picked one of his Gap books as well. I think I picked Do Over at one point.
Oh yeah, he had that one for sale on Monday, but I haven't picked it up. So yeah, we should do either Do Over or Finish, one of those two for sure.
Yeah, John Acuff is a great writer, very entertaining. My Gap book is another Tim Sanders book called Today We Are Rich, which is amazing. I loved Love is the Killer app, but Today We Are Rich is even better.
Wow.
So definitely check that one out.
It's quite the accolade.
Yeah, I'm all aboard the Tim Sanders train.
So after having gone through Paid to Think, we might be a little bit gun shy on listener recommendations, but despite that, I did select, so Anti-Fragile is the one we're reading for next time. That's my personal choice for this. But the next 5 that I have selected, and I've already picked them, so take that as you may, were listener recommendations. So people who submitted something to the contact form on the site, those came in, and then I selected those for those. And I think, Mike, maybe you can disagree with me here. I think we're starting to get to where we're doing more of these recommendations, because it's interesting to see what people recommend. And at some point, it's more fun to pull from what someone else recommends than your own list. It's kind of fun, but just the way it works out. So if you have a recommendation you want to add to this list, and you want your book to make it onto Bookworm, you can do that, bookworm.fm/recommend. And you can just fill out the form there quick. It'll hit my inbox. I'll get it on the list. We'll run from there. And if you want to see what else has been recommended, or you want to see what those 5 are that I've planned, bookworm.fm/list will get you that entire list of books.
And if you want to help other people find the show and help us take down KCRW as the top return when you search for Bookworm on iTunes, please head over to iTunes and leave us a rating and review. It really helps us out, and it helps other people find out about the show.
So thanks for joining us, and let's pick up Anti-Fragile. We'll go through it next time.